My brother tried to take everything away from me. They say that there is no one closer to family in life, but I believe that is not true. My little brother tried to take everything from me, my company, my reputation, and even my father's trust, but I didn't let it happen. My name is Mary. I am the oldest daughter of Clark Johnson, founder and owner of one of the largest construction companies in the United States. Our family business began as a small contracting business that my father built from scratch. Over the years, he worked tirelessly, and through his efforts, the company has grown into a powerful holding company that builds apartment complexes, shopping centers and office buildings across the country. Over the decades, we became a household name not only in our home state, but across America, and the pride that his name has become synonymous with quality and reliability has always sustained us through difficult times. I have always been there for my father, helping him run his business, handling difficult issues, and participating in negotiations. Despite the fact that I have a younger brother, Alex, I am the head of the strategic development department. My father always believed that I had a better understanding of the specifics of our business and was better able to make informed decisions. Alex, although he was 5 years younger than me, always dreamed of becoming the sole heir to the family business. He saw himself at the head of the company, but my father preferred to entrust me with key positions. Alex never showed much interest in construction, preferring social life and entertainment. But after his father started showing up at the office less often due to health problems, his ambitions began to grow. One morning, as the first rays of sunlight were breaking through the office windows, I came to work earlier than usual. There was some strange odor in the air, as if someone was trying to cover up traces of their presence. I sensed that something unusual was going on. The feeling just wouldn't leave me, and I decided to check Alex's office, since he often left his personal belongings there and was at work quite often before the office opened. When I entered his office, overflowing with papers and ridiculous souvenirs he collected on his trips, I immediately noticed the printout lying on the desk. The relaxed atmosphere of the office was in stark contrast to what I saw on the document, a plan to reorganize the company. Studying the paper carefully, I realized that the document spelled out the reduction of a number of departments, including the one I was in charge of. This came as a shock to me. I immediately realized that Alex was up to something serious and, apparently, extremely dangerous. My anxiety was growing by the minute. The thought that Alex might try to take advantage of our father's weakness threw me into a panic. He'd always wanted to take control of the company without realizing how much effort had gone into its creation. After gathering all the documents, I decided not to stall and went to my father's house. It was necessary to discuss the situation. When I entered the house, my father met me with a calm gaze, but I could read in his eyes that he understood the seriousness of the moment. I quickly laid out my concerns, showing him the documents and explaining the possible consequences if Alex did gain power in the company. My father listened attentively and promised to look into it, but that didn't make me feel any better. The complexity of the situation was growing, and I felt the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. However, a few days later he called me with news that left me perplexed. Dad had made the decision to temporarily hand over the management of the business to Alex. It was like a thunderclap. I couldn't believe my ears. I was horrified by the decision, because we both knew that Alex wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. I knew how it would turn out, and how difficult it would be to protect our company from a man who would do anything for personal ambition. A few months passed, and the situation in the company became critical. We started losing clients, our projects were dragging on, and our revenues were plummeting. I watched the team lose confidence, and it was deeply disturbing. I tried to intervene, offering ideas and advice, developing strategies to restore stability, but Alex just ignored me. He seemed to be interested only in his own game and further consolidation of power, not in the well-being of the company. One evening, while I was reviewing reports, Brown, an old and respected employee, came to see me. I was happy to see him and hoped he could share something encouraging. But unfortunately, he came with disturbing news. Brown reported that Alex had instructed him to organize a series of provocations against me. His voice shook as he shared this information, and I felt uneasy. According to him, Alex deliberately created situations in which I looked guilty. For example, there were cases when significant sums of money from the division's budget disappeared without a trace, and then it became known that they had been transferred to the accounts of shell companies linked to his acquaintances. Or when important documents disappeared right before important meetings and the responsibility for this was placed solely on my shoulders, giving the top management the impression that I was incompetent. I felt rage boiling up inside me. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was my own brother's cunning plan to destroy what our father had built. Brown, seeing how dangerous the situation was, suggested I gather evidence of these manipulations to protect myself. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I realized I had no choice and agreed. In the weeks that followed, I spent many hours gathering information. I went through accounting reports, talked to employees, trying to find out what was really going on at the company. Every conversation, every little detail could make a difference, and I paid close attention to every word. I began to guess how many people were trapped in Alex's scheming. And each new fact only fueled my desire to stand up for myself and get justice. I felt isolated in this complex game, but I still had hope. Maybe all was not lost. I was laying the groundwork for a confrontation and building a strategy that would hopefully help me come out clean and regain control of the situation before it was too late. Finally, after weeks of gathering information and analyzing evidence, I felt I had gathered enough evidence against Alex. I carefully recorded all the data and prepared a presentation for the board of directors that could bring order to our company and open everyone's eyes to what was really going on. On the day of the meeting, I came into the office feeling determined and confident that I was right. I knew that this was not only a chance to defend myself, but also an opportunity to save the company. When it was time to present my findings, I took a seat in front of the board. I could feel the adrenaline rushing inside me. This was my opportunity to expose the truth. I started by describing the problems going on in the company, then switched to my findings. Drawing facts and evidence on the slides, I smiled, expecting my colleagues to see how I was being used as a scapegoat. But before I could finish, I was abruptly interrupted by Alex. His voice sounded cold, full of rage. "You're trying to undermine my authority and destroy the company from within," he shouted, and his eyes glittered with unbearable anger. The board of directors hesitated, and instead of the expected support, I saw only doubt and bewilderment. They turned to him as if he were a savior, listening indifferently as he continued to pump the room with his poisonous propaganda. They said they couldn't believe that their colleague, a man who had been with the company for years, could do such a thing. I felt the blood chill in my veins. It was utter hopelessness. At that moment, I realized that all my efforts were in vain. The presence of the board of directors and their unanimous reaction threw a merciless verdict in my face. I was dishonorably discharged, accused of attempted sabotage and embezzlement of funds. I stood there in complete shock, unable to utter a word in my defense. It was only when I turned to leave the hall that I noticed my father sitting in the corner of the hall. His face was pale and his eyes full of sadness and defeat. The silence with which he watched the scene unfolding gnawed at me from the inside out. I realized that his health had indeed deteriorated, and he no longer seemed to have the strength to stand up to his son. I couldn't believe that this was how it had ended. How could he have let this happen? Questions swirled around in my head, but there were no answers. As I left the building, I felt the weight of injustice weighing on my shoulders. In the midst of all this struggle for truth, I had been left to my fate, and my next steps were unclear. I had been betrayed, but I wasn't going to put up with it. It took me a long time to come to my senses after I was fired. It was the darkest streak in my life. It seemed to me that the whole world collapsed. I lost not only my job, but also the trust of close people who used to support me. Even those I considered friends turned away from me, reading bewilderment and condemnation on their faces, as if I had really done something unforgivable. I was confused. Why didn't anyone want to hear my side of the story? Every day was a battle with my inner demons. Guilt, shame, and oppression loomed over my head like a black cloud. But despite the bitterness and loneliness, I wasn't going to give up. I knew that all this slander and meanness would not be without consequences. The truth would come out sooner or later, that was my conviction. I contacted lawyers, explaining to them what had happened and requesting assistance in gathering new evidence. Carefully reviewing the documents, they began to draw up a plan of action that I hoped could restore my lost reputation. At the same time, I began to look for new support. I reached out to those who still believed in me, old acquaintances, coworkers, and even those who remained in the company. Every conversation was intense. But at the same time, a fire was burning in my heart. I wanted to prove that all these accusations were false and to regain my honor. 6 months after my dismissal, I began to receive disturbing news about the company. During this time, it had begun to experience serious financial difficulties. Projects were being frozen and even cancelled, clients were leaving, surprised by the changes. I knew Alex wasn't managing well, he wasn't ready for such a demanding role. His methods were ineffective, and many employees, observing this mess, were leaving the company, unwilling to work under his ill-conceived and oppressive leadership. When I had the opportunity, I decided it was time to take action. I developed a comeback strategy based on the facts and events occurring within the company. In the end, seeing the whole system crumble, I felt I was getting closer to my goal. I wrote several statements, gathering new evidence, and began planning my next meeting with the lawyers, determined to try once again to get things back on track. I knew I had a chance now. And I was going to take it. But one day I got a call from my father. He asked me to come over to his house. When I arrived, he was sitting in a chair, surrounded by papers. He admitted that he'd made a mistake in trusting Alex with the management. Then he made an unexpected confession: Alex wasn't really his son. It turns out that years ago his mother had cheated on him, but he had forgiven her. However, Alex knew about it and felt anger and jealousy towards him. That's why he tried to force me out of the company by taking control of the business. Alex, according to my father, never knew how to make money honestly, relying solely on luck and connections. His inability to run the company had brought it to the brink of bankruptcy. Only my intervention could save the family business. My father sincerely apologized for believing the rumors and allowing me to be fired. He offered me my old position and the opportunity to rebuild the company. I accepted, but on one condition: Alex had to leave the company. Dad agreed. We spent several hours discussing plans to save the business. Dad talked about how important it was to regain the lost trust of our customers and strengthen our financial stability. We developed a detailed plan to rebuild the company, discussed strategies for attracting new investors, and bringing back key employees. I felt that, despite all the pain and disappointment, better times were ahead. As the months passed, the company slowly but surely returned to its former position. Clients began to trust us again, projects were completed on time, and the financial situation stabilized. My father began to delegate more authority to me, realizing that I was ready to take over the company. But despite the successes, there was still an emptiness inside me. I couldn't forget my brother's betrayal and the days when I was on the verge of collapse. One evening, while I was working late in my office, the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but I answered it. The voice on the other end of the line sounded familiar. It was Alex. "Mary, hi," he said with a sneer. "I hope you remember me?" "Of course I do," I answered coldly. "What do you want?" "How are you?" he asked. "You've got your company back and you've gotten rid of me?" I felt anger boiling up inside me. I earned my place in the company through my hard work. "If you weren't so self-absorbed, you could have taken it," I blurted out, trying to keep my dignity. His reaction was explosive. "I'm not going to let it go. You're going to regret this," Alex shouted before he abruptly hung up the phone. I was alone in the silence of the office, shaken by his words. I stared silently at the computer screen, not knowing what to say or do. My emotions were boiling inside me: anger, resentment, frustration. My conversation with Alex had left me confused and tired. Why couldn't he just let it go? Immersed in my thoughts, I stared out the window, watching the twinkling lights of the nighttime city. It seemed alive, vibrant, and full of possibilities, but to me, it was as if it was shrouded in a shroud of darkness. I thought about what lay ahead. Maybe one day we could make things work. But maybe it'll never happen. Time would tell, but right now I couldn't wait to get my thoughts together and figure out how to move forward in this confusing world that was changing so rapidly around me. A year has passed. The company is slowly recovering. We signed several large contracts, old clients returned. Alex has gone abroad, where he is trying to start his own business. My father is actively involved in the business again, but now together with me. I don't hold a grudge against my brother. Perhaps one day he will realize his mistake and come back. But for now, my task is to maintain and develop our family business. I am sure that we will succeed.